Hi there, this is Elise Bennin, your marketing mentor. And this is the podcast for you if and only if you are ready to leave the feast or famine syndrome behind, and I mean for good. Do you ever hear people say they got a new client from LinkedIn? And don't you wonder, what does that mean? And how does that work? It's actually simple, but not as effortless as it sounds. So if you want to know what actually works, today's episode is for you. I caught up with Leslie Blaize, a case study copywriter in the architecture, engineering, and construction world. She's also a member of my Simplest Marketing program, SMP Plus, and she recently landed 2 clients, one with a year-long retainer, through her LinkedIn newsletter. She shares exactly what she's doing to market herself, including where she goes to network, how often she sends her LinkedIn newsletter out, how she uses honesty to land clients, and much, much more. So listen and learn. All right. Hello, Leslie. Welcome.
It's great to be here chatting with you, Elise.
Thank you. And please introduce yourself.
All right. I'm Leslie Blaize. I'm the owner of Blaize Communications, and I am a freelance writer specializing in architecture, engineering, construction, and a case study specialist. And my goal is to help clients market their brand and differentiate themselves and connect with stakeholders.
Nice. I love your elevator pitch. And a couple things. Let's talk a little bit about your niche and how you chose it. But also, I just want to point out that you have a combination horizontal and vertical niche. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that's kind of the best kind of niche to have, where you specialize in a thing like case studies for a market like the AEC market. So just tell us how you came to that niche.
Okay. And I'll add that I do case studies, but I also do other kinds of content. But so I spent many years providing corporate communications for a multidisciplinary firm. And then when my position was no more, and then I said right then, okay, I'm going to be a freelance writer. And the first thing I did is a friend came to me and said, oh, good, now you can edit my mother's World War II memoir. So that was lovely. I mean, it was very dramatic. She was in Germany in World War II with bombs falling around, and met her husband, a serviceman. But so I got through that, and then I said, you know what? I think that's probably as good as it's going to get, and I should really go to what I have the most knowledge of, and that's the AEC industry. So then I started to focus on that. I made that a clear choice.
And explain just a little bit about what the AEC industry is for people who don't know.
Okay, so it's architects, engineering, construction. It's really the built environment and all those different specialties that fall into it. So that's basically what it is. And the reason I get into case studies was there's a lot of emphasis on the technical expertise in the AEC world, and that is wonderful. And I admire, the people in it so much. But there's also the human side of it, and the human connection. And when they're going to get work, it's people that hire them, and they hire you because they know, like, and trust you. Because we're talking about big projects here, oftentimes, million-dollar, multi-million-dollar projects, and the client really wants to know that they can trust who they're hiring. Mm-hmm. So, and that's kind of, I started taking the case study courses, through Casey Hibbard and AWAI, because, I thought, well, that's right up my alley. I'm an old newspaper reporter. So, my other life, I ran weekly newspapers and was on a daily newspaper and that kind of thing. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy doing interviews and talking with people. And then I just, learned about case studies and talking to happy clients and getting their story. And I thought, that's a piece that's often missing for these firms, is the human element and focusing on it. They talk about their project updates, and they'll talk about the technical solution, and maybe they have a testimonial, with some of the projects. But I like the idea of talking to the happy client and saying, okay, how did this firm help you? What was your challenge? What was their solution? And they can come in, their project manager or whatever can explain the project solution. And what's the result? It could be qualitative or quantitative. And that just makes it more interesting, to know. And from the beginning, now it started in 2020, I came up with the line, one case study equals 3 wins. So it's a win for the organization, the happy client that talks about it, and the prospect. And that's really the important one. What's it like to work for this firm? And, I want to know, because heck, I'm going to make this big decision, or this committee is going to make this big decision. And in the end, I'm going to be working with this firm for many, a long time, maybe years. And I want to know that I'm going to be able to get along with them. And who better to tell me than someone else in my shoes who's done the same thing, and said, hey, they really made a difference, So that's why I was drawn to it. And that's why I've become passionate about it, and eventually ended up starting this LinkedIn newsletter, is because I really believe that human connection is very important in the AEC world.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, and this is a good segue to talking about your marketing strategy, because it sounds like you've basically made it your mission to help the AEC world understand the value of case studies, because it sounds like from what you could tell, they didn't really understand why it was so important to invest in that kind of marketing tool, right?
Yeah. I mean, they have, like I say, they'll use testimonials or whatever, but not for many of them, not to the extent that I would like to see. It's very much technically based, but bring in the human element a bit, and then you get into the whole AI world, and AI is great for good for a great many things, but AI can't tell your firm's stories that differentiate you. How you drove through the night to deliver a part, or you checked on the building on Christmas weekend and discovered the pipes had frozen, and just those things that really, they demonstrate how you're committed to your craft, for the professionals.
I love that. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about your marketing strategy and then the content strategy within that. If I said, Leslie, what is your marketing strategy? What would you say?
All right, I reach out to marketing directors and managers and small business owners who might need content help. Because marketing departments, are very busy. A lot of times they're in charge of the proposals, which are a lot of work, and conferences. They have so many things to do. And I like to say, I can help with your content, and a case study, might be part of that. Well, we'll never get to that, but I could help you do that, or I could even be an advisor to you on that. So I know who my market is, and I go to. I'm a longtime member, I'll say, of Society for Marketing and Professional Services. And I've been going to their regional conferences. I live in Billings, Montana, and I've been going to the SMPS Pacific Regional Conferences. And so that way I really mingle with my, prospects, get to know what their concerns are. Let
me ask you a question there, actually.
Okay.
Because we're talking now about networking, right? In-person networking, which costs money and costs time. And often I hear copywriters and other creatives say, well, why would they let me come to one of their events? Won't they be looking at me and saying, what are you doing here? Do you ever feel that, or has that ever, God forbid, happened?
Well, for the SMPS, I mean, I'm a member of that. So, and I'm a certified professional services marketer. And, there's not all that many of us. Maybe there's 1,000, CPSMs. And so that's kind of, for the whole conference.
So you belong.
I belong. Well, I earned that designation many years ago, and I've kept it up all this time. So, I mean, I'm an outsider that I'm a freelance writer. I'm probably the only freelance writer there specializing in AEC.
And is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, I am happy meeting people, and I go around and like this. And also, you have to put yourself out there a bit. So this last conference, I went and, I got up at 3 a.m. and I was sitting there in the afternoon having my salad, and I saw a gentleman who's sitting in a chair, over there. And, I was at a table. I said, well, why don't you come on over and join me? And And so then, we were chatting and he said, oh, our company's going to write an anniversary book and we're looking for writers. I mean, how did that happen? So, I connected
Putting yourself out there. By
yeah,
putting
so
yourself out there.
I connected with him and, I'll keep in touch. I've already gone back to him and I'll continue my follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. That was a good solid lead. And then I was sitting at a table and a gentleman sat next to me and he's from an engineering company and they look for writers for their magazine. And so I got on their list, and, I will say it's a little unusual way they put the request out and the writers who respond first get the job.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was, dealing with some things and I didn't respond, quickly this last time, and that's fine. And so I didn't get on the list, but at least I'm on their list.
Yeah.
It's like a concert ticket, you have to be there and quick answer. I suppose they figure they're all qualified, but
that's
anyway,
really
that's fine. It's just a little bit different way of hiring somebody.
Okay, so you do outreach and you do networking. And what about content marketing? What do you do for content marketing?
Okay,
you said
so
your LinkedIn newsletter.
My LinkedIn newsletter. So that's really my main one. I do that once a month, and I have started sending out in case you missed it, another email. I don't know if I can do one every week, at least like you said, but I did do a second one, and it gets because people aren't going to see it all the time or click on it, and It doesn't. I noticed that others do that too. They'll resend something just because people don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if I connect with somebody, I'll invite them to join my list. So I'm up to 800 now.
Awesome.
So it's very specialized what I do. I'm never going to get the 10,000, but I don't want that.
You don't need it.
I want the people that are interested in what I have to offer. So, and I've also written for the SMPS National Magazine. I've done that in the past. Mm-hmm. And, for a client, I write for a magazine. So, there's different things that I do. So
let's talk more about your LinkedIn newsletter. How often do you send that out?
I send it out the first Thursday of every month, unless, there's a holiday or something, for the most part, I stick to the first Thursday of the month.
Okay. And how long is it, would you say?
Oh, it's about maybe 800 words or whatever. It tends, I'm longer than some, but I usually, I'm getting into explaining how to do something. Mm-hmm. And it just takes me a while. I have steps or, I've interviewed, sometimes I interview a subject matter expert and give their point of view on something. So the AEC Connect focuses on case studies and storytelling. And there's really a lot to that. I've talked about, how to use stories in your about section, the different kinds of social proof, references, testimonials, case studies. What's the actual process, the nitty gritty of it. Different ways, you can use written video, So I found all sorts of different ways to talk about it.
How do you come up with these ideas, Leslie? Where do the ideas come from?
I have used ChatGPT, to offer ideas. And so I've done that. And I just think of them, it just comes to me.
And how do you keep track of them?
I have just a file in my AEC Connect folder that talks about potential topics. And I list that. I could, probably do an Excel spreadsheet or something, but that's been okay for now. And the other good thing I've done is I go back to previous articles. I started this in July of 22, so I have quite a few articles now. And I'll go back and say, well, how can I put a different spin on this? How can I update it? So I just did that lately. I like this concept of social proof is like a treasure chest, for companies. And so initially I did a photo that I kind of designed this photo and took that, but I work with the graphic designer for my graphics for the AEC Connect. And I said, okay, I want a treasure chest and I want, these things focused, the references, testimonials, and case studies. And so I just like that idea. These marketing firms, they get their treasure, the social proof, and they may not even know they have it or they don't keep track of it. Somebody sends an engineer a wonderful email saying, "Oh, I love this project. It's made such a difference." What happens to that email? Do they, and engineers tend to be introverted maybe and shy, and like they don't want to brag, but it's just like, "Hey, this is engineer, please share that. It's wonderful. We can use that in our marketing efforts. Don't be shy."
It sounds like you're uncovering a few of their pain points as well.
Yep. That they aren't keeping track of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or references, people, I think in a lot of proposals, they have to list references. Well, has anybody checked to see the references are, still at the firm? And excuse me, but are they alive? And do they still like you? Sometimes it goes up and down. They love a project and there's issues with the next one for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then testimonials are, clients do say nice things and you keep track of them, but it's like there's that old show, the rest of the story. Well, what else is going on? Why else are they happy? So anyway, that was the last article on social proof. So,
and do you publish posts on LinkedIn as well, or just the newsletter?
I would say that I just do the newsletter, and I have started doing that reminder.
Mm-hmm.
And occasionally I do other posts as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'm focused on that and also commenting on others' work.
Say more about that.
If somebody talks about a good project, I'll say, "Oh, that's, a great looking building, kudos to you," or just trying to say something or reflect on something someone's written. Mm-hmm. So that's the best way, if they've actually written something, to go in and say, "Oh, I really agree on point A, B, C." Mm-hmm. And then, another thing that I think you've mentioned along the way is if there's someone who's really kind of high up in this AEC marketing world and they have a very good post, perhaps it's like an anniversary, and maybe they'll have like 200 people liking it. I'll go in and say, "Well, am I connected with them?" Mm-hmm. It's like there's people right there that might want to connect with me. So
that's right.
I've done that.
Excellent. And do you post anywhere else besides LinkedIn?
Just, I'd say, the LinkedIn, and I've done some magazine articles for the SMPS
But no
magazine.
Facebook?
No, I don't really. I guess I'm focused on that. And that seems to be working for me. And so that's how I use my time.
Yeah, that is the next question. How is it working? Share some of your wins that come from, if you can tell, that it comes from the content marketing.
Yeah, my two biggest clients now are from LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So one was I wrote for an industry magazine, and I did a couple articles, and just, like weeks ago, I've signed a year-long retainer with them. And that was it was my first retainer. So that was great, because they wanted to get my time to write for their 4 issues of their magazine. And I'm also going to be going, they have 2 conferences, but this year I'm going to go to one conference in North Carolina and kind of go back to my reporting days and report.
So you're going
on
on their behalf.
Yep. They're hiring me to go to their conference in North Carolina. They go all over. I can't go to the one in Denver, which I have a friend of mine I'm in a mastermind group with her, and she lives in Colorado Springs. So she's going to go to the one in Denver. So I know they'll be in good hands.
Yeah.
And so then I'm writing, I have other articles that are scheduled. So.
And for people who don't know what a retainer is, explain what that is, please.
They're paying me a certain amount of money. And so I have said, okay, I'm going to do these things for you in 2025. Write these articles, go to this conference. And for all of that, you're going to pay me one lump sum. And they're going to pay me in, quarterly, 4 different installments. So then they know they have me. And, so I can, I don't have to, I can relax knowing that I'm working with them, and then they have my time kind of guaranteed.
Right. But it's not like you're going to stop marketing, of course.
Of course not. And then, so they found me through LinkedIn. And one of the people that work there found me, and they said, we're looking for somebody to write an article for our magazine. And I started writing articles, and they liked what I did. And then they decided they wanted to get me for a retainer. So I imagine that's how it works. You establish yourself, they like you and working with you and what you've done. And so then, she wanted to have me do these various things. And then the other one also was I'm editing a best practices manual for a multidisciplinary firm. And she also found me through LinkedIn, and she interviewed me, and I submitted a proposal, and it was either me or another person, and they hired me.
Do you know why?
I think because I was honest about it. It wasn't just like, oh, it's going to be so wonderful. I say, well, what about this and this, and how are we going to work together? I wanted to know what I was getting into and send me a sample of it, so I know, what I'll be editing. And so I was pretty practical about it. I think she wanted to know that, that I knew what I was getting into, and she felt some confidence with that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, though, that you use the word honest, because I do think that's what people are looking for. And often when a prospect comes and they want you, if you will, right, people say, oh my God, they want me. And then they'll do anything to get the project. And it sounds like you were like, all right, well, let's see what it's all about. Let's see what they actually need. And then if it's a good fit, I will propose something.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll say is a vice president just came on. I have these weekly meetings where I give an update of what I've done going through this manual. And a new vice president came on, and I said, well, I probably shouldn't have used this, but I said, well, I'll give you my elevator pitch. And I just told her what I was all about, because she didn't know me. And here I was doing this big project for him.
Yeah.
And, and I said I did case studies, and I have the LinkedIn, and I said I've even presented on case studies. And she said, oh, well, that was good. I mean, I could tell she was impressed by that.
Yeah.
So that was, and possibly they might need some case studies in the future. So
absolutely. And you could pitch them.
Don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And actually, you mentioned presenting. That's another piece of your content marketing strategy. So tell us about that.
Okay. So one thing, I guess we're going to be talking about, advice to give to people. But if I think that I can do something, I will say yes, even though it worries me.
Mm-hmm.
So this is back in 2025. Somebody was doing this little video called Tidbit Tuesdays. And she said, Leslie, can I interview about case studies? So I did this as, oh, all right. So I did this. And then I come up with my phrase that I've used since then: 1 case study equals 3 wins. And then it kind of evolved from there. And then I did the LinkedIn newsletter. And somebody that I worked with on a SMPS conference many years ago, she said, oh, I kind of like that topic. Would you present to our chapter on that? And I said, okay. so, oh man, I got to come up with a presentation. Mm-hmm. But, so I did. And then I have presented to a few other SMPS chapters. And then a friend of mine was in a marketing association of Madison. And I happened to be traveling to Madison. And she said, oh, well, you want to present to our marketing group on case studies. So it was a little different focus, but I said, okay. So I went, because I was very familiar with that group. And mm-hmm. So I did an in-person presentation, and I've been on some podcasts. Mm-hmm. So, and it's kind of, it comes from my desire and my mission to promote these case studies in the AEC world. So I'm willing to, step out a bit and say, okay, here's something I believe, can I share this with your listeners, your viewers or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'm still, I'm looking to get on additional podcasts. And
has it gotten easier to be in public in that way?
I guess I'm comfortable being on podcasts. It's finding the right ones now, because I have been on some of them. So it's, finding your audience that wants to hear that, and the host that thinks that, is a good fit. So.
Excellent. All right. Last question then. What is your number one tip for our members?
Well, I think it starts with you have to have passion for what you're doing, because that pushes you forward, mm-hmm. And be willing to say yes, to new opportunities. Like I saw this SMPS was having a panel on diversity, and I thought, well, I could talk about how you can use how companies can use case studies to promote diversity, by interviewing their employees. And so this would be another tip, is to have a mentor. So I asked my mentor, who's a longtime member of the association, I said, Barb, what do you think? Is this a good idea? And I'll fill this out. Would you review it, please, and see if you think it's a good idea? And so she did. She reviewed it, and then I was picked, and I was on this panel last March.
Mhm.
So it's, being willing, try being willing to put yourself out there, and also have a mentor who will say, encourage you, or say, oh, yes, or maybe not so good. But
Who
it
will be
gives you
honest with
confidence.
you.
Yeah, who'll be honest with me. And that's, like part of your training is, learning what to do and getting input from others.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're doing beautifully, Leslie, and you're building on a really strong foundation. And I appreciate you sharing it with the viewers and members and people. Tell everyone where they can find you online.
Okay, well, you could go to my LinkedIn profile, Leslie Blaize, and I'm at blaizecommunications, .com is my website. Blaize is Blaize
Beautiful.
Communications.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again, Leslie, for taking this time and sharing what you've learned.
my pleasure.
See how Leslie is doing all the right things and it's working? I do hope her story inspires you to take one small action, one tiny baby step, and then another, and then another. And if you want my help finding actual clients with or without AI, check out my new one-on-one AI client finding coaching calls, or you can just sign up for my quick tips at marketing-mentor.com. Once you're on the site, you'll find lots more resources, including my simplest marketing plan. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time.